The first thing I remember was Daniel's face, pale, furious, and whispering through clenched teeth. "You're 17 minutes late, Anna. 17. That's how it began. The most humiliating, miraculous night of my life. The night I walked into a mansion, expecting judgment, and instead walked out having learned the one lesson I had spent my whole life trying to teach others. It arrived on a gray Wednesday afternoon while I was finishing up paperwork at the nonprofit where I worked. The subject line read, "Formal dinner invitation. Attendance required." The email wasn't just an invitation. It was a summons. Mrs. Margaret Huxley, Daniel's mother, requests the presence of her son and his companion, Ms. Anna Walker, for a formal dinner at her private residence. No RSVP, no warmth, just a command from a woman whose approval could apparently decide the fate of my relationship. Daniel had warned me. "My mother doesn't do casual," he'd said. "With her, everything's a test." That night over takeout, he handed me a printed list, actual rules for surviving the dinner. Don't talk about your job at the nonprofit. She thinks charity is for people who fail in business. Don't mention your parents. They're too ordinary. Be exactly on time. Not early, not late. Wear the navy dress I bought you and the scarf. Always the scarf. For 2 years, Daniel had carried both love and fear. Love for me. Fear of his mother. He'd told me stories about her sharp tongue, how she'd reduced business partners to stammers with a single glance. "She doesn't just judge character," he said. "She dissects it." The week before the dinner was a fog of anxiety. I worked my usual hours visiting local veterans shelters, checking in on elderly residents, but my mind was elsewhere. I loved my job at Connect Hope, a small nonprofit in Hartford that helped struggling families and veterans find stable housing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Still, I knew Margaret wouldn't see it that way. By Friday afternoon, I had everything planned down to the minute. Train at 3:45, taxi at 4:35, arrival at 4:50 sharp, dinner at 5 war. I pressed my navy dress, polished my shoes, and wrapped the scarf carefully around my neck. Daniel had said his mother would appreciate the detail. I caught the 3:45 train, my heart pounding with every stop. I reached the small suburban station with 15 minutes to spare. A taxi was waiting, but for some reason I didn't get in. I needed a minute to breathe, to walk, to think. So I started walking toward the estate. 10 minutes into the walk, I passed a small grocery store. I realized I'd forgotten a gift bag for the flowers, so I ducked inside. The line was slow. That's when I noticed her, an elderly woman at the front fumbling through her purse, apologizing as coins spilled onto the counter. The cashier's tone was sharp. "Ma'am, you're short. It's $147.86 total." The woman's voice trembled. "I thought my card would cover it." The people behind her sighed, shifting impatiently. I looked at my watch, 4:44. I could still make it if I hurried. Then I looked back at her. Her hands were shaking. She wore a faded coat and shoes that had seen too many winters. Her eyes, tired but gentle, met mine for just a second. Something inside me cracked. I didn't think. I just stepped forward. "It's okay," I said quietly. "I'll cover it." The woman froze. "Oh no, dear. You can't." "It's fine," I insisted. "Please." The cashier swiped my card. $150.12. The woman looked at me, bewildered, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "People don't do that anymore," she whispered. I smiled. "They should." I rushed out of the store, bouquet and scarf fluttering in the autumn wind. My phone read 4:52. Panic hit. I was late. Really late. I broke into a near run down the quiet street. The irony wasn't lost on me. I worked every day to teach compassion, and the first time I lived it for myself, it could cost me everything. When I reached the steps, Daniel was pacing outside, checking his watch. He looked up and froze when he saw me. His expression shifted from relief to fury in an instant. "Anna." "What? What took you so long? I tried to catch my breath. I walked. There was a woman at the store. He cut me off. You're late. Do you have any idea what this means? You're flustered, he said. And where's the scarf I told you to wear? I blinked, confused, then realized I'd wrapped it around the old woman's shoulders outside the store when I left. I gave it away, I said quietly. She was cold. Daniel's face twisted. You gave away a $700 scarf to a stranger before meeting my mother. I'm sorry, I said softly. I just couldn't walk past her. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand, Anna. My mother doesn't forgive mistakes. I followed him up the steps, heart pounding. As the butler opened them, I caught my reflection in the glass. No longer the perfect woman Daniel had trained for presentation, but someone who had chosen kindness over convenience. Daniel's fingers tightened around my wrist as the butler disappeared down the corridor. 17 minutes, Anna. Do you have any idea what you've done? I told you she judges everything, Daniel hissed. The first impression is everything to her. I gave it to someone who needed it more, I said. His eyes widened. A stranger on the street. You're unbelievable. I'm sorry, I said quietly. But if your mother can't forgive me for being late because I helped someone, then maybe this dinner says more about her than about me. He flinched. Don't say that, Anna. Please, just let me do the talking tonight. The butler reappeared. Mrs. Huxley will see you now. We followed him through a corridor lined with portraits. The dining room doors opened soundlessly. A chandelier glimmered above a long mahogany table set for 3. And at the far end sat her, Margaret Huxley. She was older than I'd imagined, late 60s perhaps, but striking. Silver hair in an immaculate twist, posture ramrod straight, eyes a pale, piercing gray. Her gaze flicked from Daniel to me, assessing, calculating. For a split second, her expression softened. So quickly I almost thought I imagined it. Mother, Daniel said, forcing cheerfulness. This is Anna Walker. Mrs. Huxley nodded once. Miss Walker, I've heard a great deal about you. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Huxley, I said. It's an honor. We sat. The butler poured wine. I reached for my napkin and froze. There, resting across the back of Mrs. Huxley's chair, was something I recognized instantly. My scarf, the same navy cashmere scarf I'd given to the woman outside the grocery store an hour earlier. It couldn't be. But no. The frayed corner, the small snag in the weave where it had caught on my bracelet. It was mine. Mrs. Huxley noticed my stare. Slowly, she adjusted the fabric around her shoulders, her lips curving in what almost looked like a smile. Chilly night? She said casually. Yes, I managed. It is. Dinner began in silence. The food looked exquisite, but I couldn't taste a thing. Every sense was tangled in confusion. Had she been the woman at the store? The tremor in her hands, the same soft rasp in her voice. It all aligned, and yet it was impossible. Margaret studied me over her glass. Daniel tells me you work in community outreach. Yes, ma'am, I said. We help families in need, veterans mostly, people who've fallen through the cracks. A noble cause, she said coolly, though I've always believed charity works best when people learn to help themselves. I smiled faintly. Sometimes they just need a little warmth to start with. Her gaze sharpened. Warmth, she repeated. Yes, a rare commodity these days. Daniel tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, but his mother barely responded. Her attention stayed on me, quiet and unwavering. When the butler cleared the plates, Mrs. Huxley placed her hands on the table. Miss Walker, she said, I imagine this evening has been rather stressful for you. Yes, ma'am, I admitted. A little. She nodded slowly. I find that people reveal who they are under pressure. Wouldn't you agree? I suppose so. Her eyes softened again. Good, because tonight, my dear, is only the beginning. Mrs. Huxley rose from her chair with slow precision. Come, she said, motioning toward the adjoining parlor. We'll take our coffee by the fire. The parlor was magnificent, walls lined with oil paintings, shelves of leather-bound books. She gestured for me to sit on the velvet sofa. Daniel perched stiffly beside me. I understand, she began. You work for a charity organization. Yes, ma'am, I said. We help struggling families, mostly veterans. Ah, she said. People who've made poor choices, I assume. Some have. Others simply had bad luck. Her eyes met mine. And you think kindness can fix them? I think kindness is the only thing that ever does, I said before I could stop myself. Daniel's heel pressed discreetly against mine, a warning, but Mrs. Huxley merely smiled faintly. You're idealistic, she murmured. Idealism is dangerous in this family. The silence stretched. Finally, she said, Do you believe in fate, Miss Walker? I'm not sure, I admitted. I believe people cross paths for a reason. So do I, she turned to Daniel. Daniel, dear, would you fetch another bottle of wine? The cellar door is just off the hall. He hesitated. Mother, that wasn't a request. When he left, she turned toward me fully. Tell me, Anna, she said, what did you do on your way here? My heart stuttered. Excuse me? You stopped somewhere. A store, perhaps. My pulse quickened. I did. I needed a gift bag. And, she pressed. There was an elderly woman, I said finally. She couldn't pay for her groceries, so I helped her. Mrs. Huxley's eyes softened. Helped her? She repeated. You mean you paid? Yes, $150, she nodded slowly. That's a great deal of money for a stranger. It didn't feel like a choice, I said quietly. Most good deeds don't, she replied. Daniel returned. Mrs. Huxley stood. Thank you, dear. Pour for us, will you? As he bent to the task, she turned back to me. Anna, do you know what I admire most in people? I shook my head. Consistency, she said. The way someone behaves when no one important is watching. Daniel chuckled awkwardly. Mother, I'm sure, Anna. Quiet, Daniel, she said sharply. You told me she was late. His face flushed. Yes, but she was late because she stopped to help a stranger, she finished. Did you tell her that part? Daniel stared at her, confusion flooding his face. How did you... I was there, she said simply. I was the woman at the store. The room fell silent. Daniel blinked. What are you talking about? She adjusted the scarf around her shoulders. I wanted to see what kind of person my son was marrying. And now I know. I sat frozen. Words tangled in my throat. Mrs. Huxley continued. You didn't know who I was, yet you gave what little you had without hesitation. You failed my son's test of punctuality, Miss Walker. But you passed mine. Daniel's mouth fell open. You set her up? I observed, she corrected. And I learned more in 10 minutes than you've shown me in 35 years. He turned pale. Mrs. Huxley looked back at me. Kindness is rare among the ambitious. Don't ever let anyone convince you it's weakness. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled. A real one this time. No, my dear, thank you. Daniel's knuckles whitened around his wine glass. For a moment, none of us spoke. I wanted to see who my son was marrying, Margaret said. And I wanted to see who you were when no one was watching. Daniel's jaw clenched. So you disguised yourself? That's insane. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Is it? I've spent my life surrounded by people who smile when I enter a room and gossip the moment I leave. So yes, I sometimes prefer to meet people when they believe I'm nobody at all. She turned to me. Tell me, Anna, why did you do it? You didn't know who I was. Because she looked like she needed help, I said. And because it didn't cost me anything that mattered. You'd be surprised how many people can't say the same. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Mother, this is cruel. You made her feel like she failed. She didn't fail, Margaret interrupted. She passed. You failed, Daniel. You let fear make you cruel. You taught her to hide her goodness when you should have been proud of it. His face flushed. That's not fair. Oh, it's perfectly fair, she said. You've spent your whole life trying to impress me with perfection when all I ever wanted was sincerity. Margaret sighed. You remind me of someone, she said to me quietly. My husband, before the money, before the power, he believed in people. He used to say, kindness is the only investment that never loses value. I suppose I wanted to see if anyone still lived by that rule. I didn't mean to pass or fail anything, I said. I just couldn't walk past her. That's exactly why you passed. She stood, lifting the scarf from her shoulders. She folded it neatly, then placed it on the table in front of me. This is yours, she said. I believe it belongs to the right person now. You didn't have to, she shook her head. Yes, I did, because tonight wasn't about you meeting me. It was about me meeting you. Daniel slumped in his chair. So what happens now? Margaret's eyes flashed. Forgive her? I should thank her. She reminded me what decency looks like. She turned to me again. You see, Anna, when you've lived long enough in rooms like this, you start to forget the texture of genuine kindness. You start mistaking obedience for goodness. Tonight you reminded me that compassion still exists. Thank you, Mrs. Huxley. Please, she said gently. Call me Margaret. You've earned that much. Daniel stared at her, stunned. Margaret turned her gaze on him. If you wish to keep your place in this family, Daniel, learn to see people for who they are, not what they wear. He looked away, ashamed. Margaret reached for her cup. Anna, I know this evening must have been overwhelming, but I hope you understand why I did it. I do, I said. You wanted to know if I'd care when it wasn't convenient. Exactly. And now I know. After a long moment, she said, Shall we start over? I nodded. I'd like that. She extended her hand across the table. I took it. Her grip was firm, her palm warm. Dinner is served, she said quietly. The butler opened the doors to reveal a second course. The air felt lighter, warmer. As we sat again, Margaret glanced toward me. You see, Anna, she said, the world has plenty of wealthy people. What it lacks is people with hearts that stay generous even when no one's watching. Her words stayed with me long after the last plate was cleared and the fire burned low. Dinner resumed, but nothing about it felt ordinary. Margaret Huxley was no longer just a symbol of wealth or judgment. She was human, piercingly so. Daniel sat small in his chair, eyes darting between me and his mother. I can't believe this, he muttered. Margaret didn't look up from her plate. You've spent too many years believing all the wrong things. Finally, Margaret placed her napkin beside her plate and looked directly at her son. Daniel, she said softly, do you know why I stopped trusting your judgment years ago? His voice cracked. Because I married the wrong kind of woman. Her brow furrowed. Because you stopped listening to your own conscience. You began living for appearances, mine, society's, anyone's but your own. She turned toward me. And you, Miss Walker, reminded me what character looks like. I didn't mean to prove anything. That's exactly why you did, she said. It's the people who don't mean to, who usually pass life's hardest tests. Daniel rubbed his temples. You've been testing everyone your whole life, Mother. No one can ever win with you, she nodded. That's true because most people want to win for themselves, not for something greater. He stared at her. And you think she's different? Margaret smiled faintly. I don't think. I know. Margaret leaned back. Do you remember what your father used to say? Daniel hesitated. That life is a competition. No, she said. Power without empathy is bankruptcy of the soul. You inherited his ambition, but not his wisdom. A tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. Margaret's tone gentled. Daniel, my tests weren't meant to break you. They were meant to wake you. The world won't remember your quarterly reports. It'll remember whether you were kind when it was inconvenient. Margaret turned to me again. Anna, tell me about your work. The one he told you not to mention? Daniel looked mortified. Mother, please. It's all right, I said. I work for Connect Hope. We help veterans, single parents, anyone who's struggling to get back on their feet. Margaret nodded slowly. And how do you fund this organization? We rely on donations, grants, volunteers, I said. Mostly people who believe that compassion isn't weakness, she smiled. How refreshing. Then turning to Daniel, "You see, my son, this is what strength looks like. The courage to care." Daniel's shoulders shook. "I was so afraid of disappointing you. I thought you wanted someone who'd fit your world." "I wanted someone who'd change it," she said quietly. Her hand reached across the table and covered his. "You've spent years chasing my approval," she continued. "But approval is cheap. What I wanted was pride," he nodded faintly. "I understand now," she smiled sadly. "Good. Then maybe you'll forgive me for how I've tested you all these years." He exhaled shakily. "If you can forgive me for how easily I failed them." Margaret leaned back. "You both remind me that it's never too late to choose the right measure of worth." She looked at me again. "Anna, I hope you never change. The world doesn't need more perfect women. It needs women who still believe that kindness matters." "Thank you, ma'am. That's the kindest thing anyone's ever said to me." Daniel looked at me, a different look, one of awe and guilt and gratitude all tangled together. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I reached across the table, gently touching his hand. "So am I," Margaret rose. "Well," she said lightly, "I think that's quite enough honesty for one evening." A faint, warm laughter rippled through the room. As we stood, she glanced at me one more time. "Anna," she said, "if you ever tire of non-profit work, I could use someone like you in my foundation." I smiled. "Maybe someday. But I think the world still needs me where I am." "Then stay," she said softly. "And stay exactly as you are." She reached for the scarf and placed it once more around her shoulders. "Not all gifts are meant to be returned," she murmured. Daniel smiled, small but real. "You kept it." "I did," she said. "To remind me that wealth only matters when it's warm." That line would stay with me for the rest of my life. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet sunrise after a long, sleepless night. Daniel called his mother the next morning, not to argue, but to apologize. He told her he finally understood what she'd been trying to teach him. She didn't say much in return, only that she hoped he'd start living by what he now claimed to understand. He did. Slowly, awkwardly but sincerely. For me, the days returned to their usual rhythm. Early mornings at Connect Hope, meetings with donors, home visits. But everything looked different. Kindness had always been my work. Now it felt like my calling. A month later, Margaret asked me to lunch. We met at a quiet cafe. She wore no jewelry, no pearls, no scarf, only a soft gray sweater that made her look almost ordinary. "I never thanked you properly," she said. I smiled. "You don't have to." "I do," she insisted. "You reminded me that kindness isn't supposed to be strategic. Somewhere along the way I forgot that." She stirred her tea. "When my husband died, the people around me divided into two kinds. Those who wanted comfort and those who wanted my approval. I stopped trusting both. But that day in the grocery store, when you didn't know who I was, you gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost." "What's that?" "Faith," she said quietly. "That goodness still exists when no one's looking." That weekend, Daniel and I went back to my hometown to visit my parents. Daniel had always dreaded the idea before. This time, he couldn't stop talking with them. He listened to my father's stories, helped my mother fix her garden fence, and laughed for the first time in weeks. Late that evening, while we sat on the porch, he turned to me and said softly, "You know, I thought my mother's approval was the only thing that mattered. But that night showed me something else." "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "You can't earn love by impressing people. You earn it by doing what's right when no one expects you to. When our wedding day came, it wasn't at the Huxley estate." Margaret insisted on that. "Too cold," she'd said. "Instead, we married in my parents' backyard beneath a canopy of string lights and autumn leaves. It was simple, quiet, and beautiful." Margaret arrived early wearing a navy blue dress and, of course, the same cashmere scarf. She greeted every guest, smiled for every photograph, and cried softly during the vows. After the ceremony, she stood to give a toast. "There are moments in life," she said, "when we're asked to choose between what looks proper and what feels right. I used to believe that the world rewarded the proper. Now I know it remembers the right." She raised her glass toward me. "To Anna, who reminded me that kindness, when given freely, has a way of coming home. That night, as the music faded and lanterns swayed in the cool breeze, I thought about everything that had led me there. The grocery store, the fear, the judgment, the revelation. We chase so many tests in life, but the only tests that matter are the ones we don't realize we're taking, the ones that measure our heart when no one else is watching. It's been years since that day, but every time I see someone struggle in a checkout line or shiver at a bus stop, I think of Margaret, of Daniel, and of that scarf. And I think of how a small act of kindness rewrote the story of an entire family. So if you're listening to this story right now, maybe ask yourself, what would you have done in that grocery store? Would you have hurried past or would you have stopped? Sometimes the simplest choice is the one that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in quiet goodness, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to matter. And remember, kindness doesn't ask for attention. It just asks to be done.